Welcome to The Week with me, George Galloway, here every Friday night between 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning, and only on Talk Sport. We're talking about a week, the likes of which we rarely see. Another one bites the dust. Generalissimo Muammar al-Gaddafi, the brother leader, has bitten the dust after 42 years in prison. No, prison's where he's heading. He turned his country into a prison, and the people are now free. Or are they? Will they have gone from the frying pan into the fire? Will they now be prisoners of the NATO, air forces, and the governments that sent them? We'll be talking about the grave fears amongst the British public about a plummeting into a double-dip recession. And we'll be talking about the British government's outlandish, surely, idea of taking upon itself the power to shut down Twitter and Facebook in times that they think it is politically expedient to do so. And in the week when a new planet was discovered, 5 times the size of Earth and made entirely of diamond. Oh, how's that for a girl's best friend? We'll be talking to Tony Topping, the UFO specialist, about some top-secret, newly released X-Files, they're always X-Files, which show that Stansted area, that's just buzzing with unidentified flying objects. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours or so. With me, George Galloway, on The Week on Talk Sport.
The Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
Muammar al-Gaddafi, who came to power in 1969, a young, handsome, Nasserist army officer who wanted to unite Libya with President Nasser's Egypt and contribute thus to the uniting of the Arab world behind the banner of Arab unity, who later, tiring of the Arabs, turned to Africa and tried to make himself the king of the heap, and who in his last stage, which lasted, well, the best part of a decade, became, well, just another pro-Western Arab tyrant, such that Mr. Tony Blair treated him not once but several times to the warm, if grisly, embrace of his Faith Foundation and his role as an advisor to the Libyan Sovereign Wealth Fund. The last time I was in Libya, people who were in a position to know told me that Mr. Blair was earning £1 million per year from Colonel Gaddafi. You couldn't really make that up, could you? He was in from the cold. He was the man who was showing the Arab and Muslim world the way, breaking up his weapons programs if he ever had them, tearing them up for the edification of his previous enemies, and rolling over and crying uncle. Fat lot of good it did him, because Uncle Sam and John Bull and the perfidious former colonial masters of Italy and France turned on Gaddafi at the first opportunity that they got, and they've done him in. And I, for one, am glad that he's been done in. I know, of course, that this revolution would not have triumphed, at least not now, if it were not for the intervention of these former colonial powers. I know, of course, that there are all sorts of individuals and grouplets within the Libyan opposition. Trust me on this. They're not all chanting about Gaddafi being a Jew for nothing. They're not all chanting Allahu Akbar into every camera that they can find for nothing. There is, indeed, at least a flicker of Al-Qaeda, to put it in the Pentagon's now famous words, about the Libyan opposition. But there are also others. The Muslim Brotherhood are there and played a significant part in the fighting and in the revolution, and one must hope, actually, that they, rather than the more extreme Salafist factions, don't begin to dominate. There are intelligence assets, long-term intelligence assets of MI6 and the CIA, who've been, shall we say, over the decades in exile, looked after by the intelligence services, and the intelligence services will now be seeking some payback, as indeed the countries that invaded and occupied Iraq were able to get quite a considerable payback for their investment. Because, of course, there is no such thing as a free lunch. And if all these former colonial masters, all these NATO powers, have spent all this money and used up all this political capital to put the National Transitional Council in power in Tripoli, you can be sure they did not do it out of the goodness of their heart, for heart they have not. No, they did it, and they will want paying for it. However, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and just because the West wants paying doesn't mean it's going to get paid. Let me just add one last point, and I'll be putting this to Michael Binion, the Foreign Affairs Specialist and editorial writer with the Times, in just a moment or two. He may or may not agree with me. The situation that we now have is deeply unstable, but don't let that tempt you into sending British soldiers in to stabilize it, because nothing could be guaranteed to make the Salafists, well, they don't dance because it might lead to who knows what. But if they did dance, they'd dance with delight at the idea of British, French, Italian, maybe even, if they were really lucky, American soldiers landing in Libya to stabilize it. It's the word of the moment. William Hague, David Cameron, they're all big on stabilizing Libya. Well, let me tell you, the very last thing that should be done to stabilize it is to send Western soldiers in to occupy it. Because if we do, then we will be throwing good blood after blood that's already been shed in the occupations of Iraq and the ongoing occupation of Afghanistan. Indeed, we will be departing down exactly the same bloody road that we have already traveled in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, that's my piece. Of course, I want to hear yours. 08717 2233 44 is the number to call me. You can text me on 81089 for 50 pence, plus normal sending charges. We want your song for the week. My goodness, what song could sum up the week we've just had? And we want your emails also, free of charge, through the website at talksport.co.uk. This is George Galloway. This is The Week. This is TalkSport. Now, the Libyan rebels are having to fight hard to get a hold on the country's capital, Tripoli, and have largely postponed the planned move of their headquarters from their stronghold of Benghazi. They continue, of course, to search for Colonel Gaddafi and still face stiff opposition from forces loyal to his regime. Defense Secretary Little Liam Fox says Gaddafi's time is up, but he didn't say it quite as toughly as that.
The regime need to recognize that the game is up. It is all over. And they need to stop attacking their own people. But as long as they do continue to attack the people, NATO will continue to act as we have done under the UN Resolution 1973.
He delivered that stentorian piece of advice wearing short trousers. I'm reliably informed. 08717 223344. That's the number to call to join the great debate. And, of course, if your point of view is different to mine, your call will be prioritised. And if you're a woman caller, then ditto. Now, Michael Binion knows a thing or two about foreign affairs. He's a foreign affairs specialist, and he works for the London Times as editorial writer. And I'm glad that he's joined us. Michael, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Now, tell me, what do you think is the likelihood of catching Gaddafi, or has he flown the coop?
I doubt if he's left Libya, but catching him might be quite a long process. Remember, it took 8 months before they found Saddam, and he was pretty well concealed in a hole in the ground in a farm miles from Baghdad. I don't know whether there's a hole waiting for Gaddafi, but he could be almost anywhere. He's probably got an elaborate escape mechanism already worked out sometime in advance. So if he's got trusted loyalists who'll be hiding him, it could take a while to find him.
Indeed, and there's a real possibility that he's in or around Sirte, his hometown and now strongest base, which is apparently defending each yard of territory as the rebel forces advance. And of course, the further you go from Tripoli, the further south you go into the vast desert of what is a very big country. It's 1,000 miles long for a start. The coastline is 1,000 miles from one border to the other. I mean, it could be a needle in a haystack, or, of course, he might just pop up somewhere like Zimbabwe, no?
He might, yes. Certainly Zimbabwe would give him a warm welcome, and actually even South Africa as well, because he was always seen as one of the staunch friends of the anti-apartheid movement, and Nelson Mandela has still quite a soft spot for Gaddafi. He's spent a lot of money helping African countries. I don't think it's likely he could have got away and got out of his country without some people noticing. I mean, after all, NATO has got listening devices in planes that are patrolling the whole of Libya, so they would have picked up any chatter about flight. I think your suggestion of Sirte is the most likely. That's probably where he's gone.
Yes. As it happens, I checked this point out about South Africa because it was often said after the fall of apartheid that Gaddafi had, well, bankrolled the liberation movement very considerably. But a person who should know told me that, perhaps characteristically, Gaddafi gave most of his money to the PAC, the rivals to the African National Congress, the more extreme African nationalist group, and thus contributed actually to quite a bit of disunity inside the liberation movement. But that's by the by. Just before we leave him for the moment, how important is it to achieve this closure? Could the revolution go ahead? Could transformation begin whilst he's still uncaptured or undead? Well,
it would be difficult because I think he still has a kind of psychological hold over many Libyans. It's very like Saddam. He was very much a one-person rule. He was the all-powerful dictator, and they are still, to some extent, in fear of his name even. It's only when he's behind bars or when they feel that he's no longer able to summon up his loyalists that they will really feel safe to go and say what they think and start a new way of life. Until then, I think people are going to be pretty cautious.
Now, Michael, I referred earlier in my talk-up to the flicker of Al-Qaeda, which the Pentagon identified a couple of months ago amongst the ranks of the Libyan revolutionaries. Where do you stand on that? Do you detect any flickering?
I think they're certainly there, yes. They've been lying low. They've been quite clever in the way they've played this. Of course, they were sworn enemies of Gaddafi. He was, after all, an old-fashioned Arab national socialist. I mean, he was a sort of follower of Nasser from years ago, and these people had no truck with any kind of Islamist groups. And similarly, the Islamists had been one of the few groups that had tried to overthrow Gaddafi. So, to some extent, until these latest developments, Gaddafi was seen by the West as quite a useful ally in the fight against Islamic extremism. But that does mean that the rebels opposing him do contain a number of people who the West would really not like to see have a big say in the new government. And it's quite difficult to work out how strong they are, what their influence is, and what sort of role they might play in the future.
Indeed, we won't know how many votes they've got, but then they might not need votes because they've got plenty of guns.
They've got plenty of, almost everyone has guns in Libya.
Indeed, but since they looted the palace, it seems that they've all got 10 or 12 guns now.
Well, and the palace was like an artillery, like an arsenal.
Indeed, and there was no, if there is an officer corps in the rebel army, it was not present on that day because the looting was considerable, and especially of weapons and ammunition. So, is there not, well, I infer from what you say, that you agree with me that there is a danger. We could argue about how to calibrate that, but a danger that we might have done what we previously did in Afghanistan. Give a lot of weapons and a lot of military and indeed now financial power to a group of people that might turn out to be even less palatable to us than the people that they overthrew.
Well, indeed, that is a danger. I don't think it's one that will or should stop the help that the West has given to the insurgents, because almost anything was better than what we saw of Gaddafi in the last year or so. And it's clear that his own people were thoroughly sick of him. I think the key thing is to make sure that the moderate groups who appear to be in control of most of the coalition of opposition, that these people are able to keep control and make sure that extremist elements don't come to the fore. Now, it's difficult to ensure that. I mean, after all, the NATO allies are not there on the ground. There's no way they could or should have a say in that kind of running of Libya. But I think encouragement should be given to them to make sure that they take the right steps to make sure it doesn't degenerate into the kind of chaos we saw in Iraq.
Now, lastly, Michael, and I'm grateful for your time, we were told, Solomon binding and all that, by the Prime Minister, the Parliament was told, the people were told, that there would be no British boots on the ground in Libya, and that turns out to have been a lie, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, there have been one or two advisors, but boots, I mean, there's not been military units in Libya, and I don't think there will be. In fact, I don't think there'll be any Western units actually on the ground, because that would simply be undermining the credibility of the entire opposition front. And certainly the Arab countries wouldn't welcome that. I think most Western countries have felt that, you know, this kind of thing happened once or twice, well, twice before, and it shouldn't happen again.
But many newspapers this morning, including I think your own, I may be wrong on that, are saying that that British special forces not only have been, but are in the assault on Sirte involved.
Well, I think there are some people, I wouldn't call them boots on the ground, but some, you know, fairly shady characters who are probably giving unofficial advice and perhaps directing NATO airstrikes. They're not huge units of fighting men. There may indeed be special forces. How many, I have no idea. And if they are special forces, the numbers probably wouldn't be published. But I doubt if it would be a large visible unit.
Okay, Michael Binion, thanks very much indeed. The Foreign Affairs Specialist from the London Times, kicking off our discussion about Libya. We're talking about Libya. We're talking about the economy and the Comres poll, which shows that a huge percentage of the British people think that we're about to plummet into a double-dip recession, which, of course, runs the very real risk of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we'll be talking about the extraordinary, even outlandish idea that the British state should take upon itself the power to shut down Twitter and to shut down Facebook. Now, I have, the best part of 100,000 people following me on those two media. And so I have to declare an interest. The idea that little Jimmy Clitheroe, Liam Fox, or David Bullingdon, Eaton, Cameron should have the power to cut me off from the 100,000 people that I speak to several times a day is very, very unpalatable to me, and indeed deeply hypocritical, because, of course, we're forever telling the Iranians and the Chinese with a wagging finger of how this kind of authoritarianism really gives even dictatorships a bad name. Tell me where you stand on that. We'll be looking also at the extraordinary career of Steve Jobs leaving Apple, the man who brought us the iPhone, the iPad, and iTunes, the man who's built a corporation which on some days is the most valuable corporation on the earth, even though it doesn't actually make very much, which tells you something about late contemporary capitalism. It's the week. It's George Galloway. It's Talk Sport. Now, Gaddafi's forces took a bit of a beating in the week in Tripoli, but they're not finished yet. The BBC, on the other hand, is almost certainly finished, because it took, metaphorically, an even bigger beating from Sky News. In fact, from all their competitors. But Sky's special correspondent, Alex Crawford, was there when the rebels stormed Colonel Gaddafi's fortress-like compound in Tripoli on Tuesday after an all-day battle against forces loyal to the long-time leader. The sprawling complex is the most defining symbol of Gaddafi's near 42-year rule. The compound's gates were blasted open, and hundreds of rebels then poured in to loot it.
That was them firing their homemade rocket launcher, but they are really trying to... They're really trying to push forward.
Well, she needed her tin hat, but she was remarkable, I must say. In fact, she's been basically on a peripatetic stroll across the world. All the hotspots have been visited by Alex Crawford. She is a remarkable correspondent, and if she ever comes back to this country, we really must make a point of interviewing her and congratulating her on some really quite spectacular journalism. Now, here's some texts. One concern I have is that the African League of Nations are refusing to recognise the rebels of Libya, says Kevin. And Keith in Hertfordshire says all this shutting down Twitter and arming the police in times of civil unrest makes me think they're just preparing for when it really kicks off, when they're all exposed for their vile self-interests. And Dan in Luton says, Salam, George, we had no right to go in Libya, just like we had no right to invade Iraq. Why can't we do some good instead and go to Syria? Then again, it does not have oil, right? Hypocrisy, ! says Dan. John from Glasgow says the song of the week should be Wake Up Everybody by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. I don't remember that song, but I really liked Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. I need your song suggestions that sum up the week, please. Keep them coming in. And Mike, the London cabbie, says, with regard to the question, are we heading for another recession? My reply would be, another recession. We haven't finished the last one yet. I'm working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week at the moment, yet I'm falling further behind. I can't break even. London is dead, as quiet as I've seen it in 26 years of driving a taxi. Of course we're still in recession, says Mike. Thanks for that, Mike, and big up to all those driving for a living this evening, especially the cabbies, who, as my daughter always says, are very clever men. Here's Marco in Ealing. Marco?
Hello, George.
Yes, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, George. I'm from Ealing, but originally I'm from Belgrade.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, listen, George, you're a hypocrite.
Why is that?
You're a sellout. You opposed the war, the bombing of Serbia in 1999, yes?
I did, yes.
Yeah, now you're supporting the NATO intervention, ganging up, imperialism.
Are you some kind of madman that's been let out for the weekend? You think I'm supporting the NATO operation in Libya?
But George, you said you opposed Gaddafi.
Listen, do you think that because you oppose Gaddafi, that means you support NATO? Why don't you just type in the words George Galloway plus Libya on YouTube, and there you'll find speech after speech after speech, interview after interview after interview, of me in the most vehement way I possibly can muster, denouncing the NATO bombardment of Libya. In fact, you've obviously just tuned in, because you obviously didn't even listen to the introduction to the show, Marco in Ealing. Well, if you did listen, then you find difficulty in computing in the English language, because my entire discourse was denouncing NATO's intervention in Libya.
Okay, then I stand corrected, okay?
Excellent. I like to quit while I'm ahead. Here is Pal in Birmingham. Go ahead, Pal.
All right, George, Song of the Week with a little help from my friends by the Beatles.
Yes, good song, yes. Yeah. Joe Cocker's version was better, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. With regards to this Libya thing, the BBC is a bit of a disgrace. All it's been doing every time I watch a news bulletin is just continuously going on about Libya. I mean, it's funded by British people, so surely they should also be talking about things that are going on in our country as well.
Yeah. In fact, I sometimes think they should give one of these warnings, these health warnings, that this BBC report has been compiled under the eyes of government watchers. Although, actually, they don't even need government watchers. They just automatically point in the same direction as the British guns.
I think there's days of when they were seen as like a left-wing anti-government group, or some people put them forward as that. They've long gone. They're very establishment-friendly. But, I mean, the war propaganda, it's all one-sided. It's all painting Gaddafi as the villain in some Hollywood blockbuster. And it's just a representation of what the British government's saying.
Yes, but the
we
point...
don't really know why we're there. The average guy in the street in
No, they don't.
Ladywood, Liverpool doesn't know why he's there, why we're funding him.
Paul, I keep asking, when I get the chance, because I'm almost never on BBC television, but I was on the 5 Live this morning on the news programme with Nicky Campbell at 8:05. I always ask them, how come, if Gaddafi's as bad as you're telling us he is, which I myself have been saying for decades, how come over the last 10 years you never once told us this? How come over the last 10 years you uncritically covered Blair kissing him in the tent, you uncritically covered the British companies making hundreds of millions of pounds profit every year from this dictatorship, whilst the dictator was torturing people, imprisoning people, murdering people, disappearing people? How come you in the BBC never noticed any of this over the last decade?
Didn't choose to notice it, more likely.
Exactly.
But, what I'm interested in is, like, why have the rebels not put any manifesto towards, why is the British, the average member of the public, we're not really aware of why we are there, just to oppose a dictator. But obviously we saw in Afghanistan that, today's romanticised freedom fighters are obviously tomorrow's monsters. And what's to say 20 years down the line, some Oxbridge-educated politician or prime minister isn't going to send us in again to topple the new regime when it steps out of line.
Well, the thing is, as we discovered in the Afghan theatre, that when Frankenstein was created, he only became a monster when he broke away from his creator, when he was no longer under the control of his creator. That's why he's called a monster. Here is Jonathan in Swansea on the extraordinary discussions in the week between the Prime Minister and other senior cabinet ministers and officials of Twitter and Facebook and the rest about the possibility of the British government taking power to shut down the internet, to shut down social networking. Jonathan in Swansea thinks that would be dangerous. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I just can't believe this. Earlier this year, when Egypt and Libya were shutting down Twitter, the mobile phone network and the internet, the West was up in arms.
Good
and yet
point.
Now that we've had these riots in London, which I'm a bit dubious about whether they were actually spontaneous instead of organised in some way by elements within the government are now using it as a chance to shut down the internet, doing the very thing that they criticise other countries for, and possibly bringing in martial law. Don't these idiots realise they're playing into the hands of those they criticise, like Iran? They're playing into the hands of people like Alex Jones, who accuse them of being genocidal maniacs. They are just so completely clueless. And what this will lead to is another lot of riots. But instead of looting shops and businesses, they'll be looting 10 Downing Street, Parliament, Buckingham Palace.
Oh, well, let's hope not, Jonathan. I mean, the truth is, even if I don't go all the way with you on many of the things that you said, the truth is that we're going around the world spending our treasure and oftentimes our young men's blood for liberty and democracy in other people's countries, all the while shutting liberty and democracy down in our own country. Here's Martin in Motherwell. Go ahead, Martin.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Sorry for waiting there. George, it's not something I normally phone in about, but see, I remember a few years ago you referred to Colonel Gaddafi as barking mad.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Aye. And So I want to clarify that. The problem, my concern is, see that area of the world where it's Israel, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, blah, 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 Egypt, Saudi Arabia, they seem to have they seem to be more, they can get away with whatever they want to get away with regards, etc. I think we all know what we're talking about regarding oil, etc. But what is it with the areas of the world that America, the UK and the UN and the other countries, including NATO, why are they so concerned about this area?
Well, the best answer I can give you is the one given by the Defense Secretary, as was under the Bush administration, Donald Rumsfeld, who said, in terms, "It's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries." And I'm not making that up, Martin. Here is George in Airdrie on the Twitter subject. George, welcome.
Hello, Mr. Galloway.
Hi.
This Twitter thing, it's beyond a joke. I can't understand it, because the British government, it's typical of them. It's one rule for them, one rule for everybody else. It's the same as America and all these kind of imperialist, colonialist countries that think they can do whatever they want while criticising everybody else for doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They talk about the people in China not being able to use Twitter, and would the fall of Mubarak and Ben Ali and all the rest of it, would that have happened without sites like Twitter and all that kind of thing? It's just another step, I think, because the British government's going to bring in more and more powers. You've already got it now. The Metropolitan Police, the amount of people they've killed, and then the IPCC just basically, no matter what you say, the IPCC just wipes it under the carpet, uses every trick in the book to make sure that nobody's prosecuted for it. So police are basically getting away with murder, and now they want to shut down social networking to take away yet more freedom. Where's it going to lead to when they're going to start shooting people in the streets for protests and all that? I just don't understand.
Well, of course, they haven't done that. They haven't done that yet, and we oughtn't to be too alarmist. And neither should we paint a picture of a Metropolitan Police which is a kind of dangerous gang roaming around the capital, gunning people down, or that the IPCC is invariably and exclusively some kind of stooge organization. I don't believe that any of those things are true. But there are many straws in the wind, and to mix the metaphor, sometimes a cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of a very great storm to come. We're talking about Libya. We're talking about the hunt for Gaddafi. We're talking about the presence of either British special forces or, as the man from the Times said, some shady individuals who are not wearing boots, but perhaps trainers or sneakers or something. We're talking about the British economy. We'll be talking later about a remarkable poll conducted by Comres, which shows that almost 2/3 of British people believe that the UK is heading for another recession, which is therefore making it much more likely that that actually happens. We'll be talking, as we have indeed started to talk, about government powers to shut down the internet when they see politically fit. And we'll be talking about newly released top-secret X-Files that have revealed the only way is Essex for the unidentified flying object. It's George Galloway. It's the week on TalkSport. The Prime Minister rejoined his family on holiday in Cornwall on Tuesday. Well, there's only a war on. The Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, we're safe in his hands, has said it won't hinder the government's response to the crisis in Libya. And these people in Port Isaac in Cornwall, where the Camerons are staying, agree that the Prime Minister deserves a break.
He needs rest to make the right decisions.
And it was good to see that he went back to Downing Street, but great to know that he can still feel free to come on holiday when he can.
He came back and dealt with what needed to be dealt with, and he's entitled to have to spend time with his family.
Well, is this not the third or even the fourth holiday that Cameron has had this year? Let me just get this right. 2/3 of British people think we're about to plunge into another recession, a double dip, depression, There's mass unemployment. There was, just a week or so ago, the sight of Britain in flames in the grip of riots. The country is involved in not one but 2 wars. Our soldiers, who could do with a bit of time with their families, are being sent into distant wars for no purpose that anyone can imagine. But hey, Cameron needs to be in Cornwall on holiday again. Where do you stand on that? Am I being mean? 08717 223344. That's the number to call. 81089 is the number to text at 50 pence plus normal sending charges. I need your song that sums up the week, and I need your point of view on the issues that we are discussing. Tonight you can also email that free of charge through the website at talksport.co.uk. We're talking about Libya, the war, and what it will lead to, and whether or not we're going to, even if they're not wearing boots, have British service personnel on the ground in Libya. I'm warning you now, remember that you heard it here. British personnel staying on the ground in Libya, in this war, and in the counterinsurgency that will follow this war, will have the same bloody, grisly consequences of the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. Mercenaries will be captured and will have their heads cut off. People will be murdered. Bombs will be planted under their vehicles. There'll be drive-by shootings. There'll be suicide bombings. Don't do it, Liam, in your short trousers in the Ministry of Defence. Do not do it. I'm warning you. Don't do it. We've lost enough blood of our young service personnel. We've wasted enough money from our treasury, sadly depleted. Do not participate in the occupation of Libya. At least that's my point of view. What is yours? 08717 223344. Now, Comres is one of the top opinion pollsters, and Tom Black is the research manager at Comres. And they've just produced a poll which says almost 2/3 of Britons believe that the UK is heading for another recession. 54% of people are cutting back their own spending now because they believe there will be another recession soon. And I'd like to know how you feel about the economy. Are you worried about your own prospects, your finances? And what do you think are the ways out of this recession? But Tom was very kind in joining us at this late hour to talk about this poll. Tom Black of Comres. Thanks very much for joining us, Tom.
Good evening, George.
Good evening. Now, were you surprised at the scale of the pessimism measured in this poll?
I think we were surprised. I think we were somewhat prepared for it, though. We've been doing this polling since about October last year, which you'll remember was around the time of the Comprehensive Spending Review, and the announcement of the cuts in public spending.
Yeah.
And what we've seen over the course of the last 10 months is a general worsening of the public mood. The public are now more negative about their own personal finances and about the general state of the economy than they were 10 months ago, and that's gradually gotten worse. Looking at that figure in terms of predicting a double dip, a second recession, that being at 2/3 now, you also have a greater proportion of people concerned about their own job security than you had 10 months ago. The political context for this, though, is that people are now less supportive of the cuts in public spending. In October, it was roughly equally split, with some people supporting and some people opposed. Now you have a clear majority who believe that the cuts in public spending are going too far and too fast. That's the wider political context. So while you have the great proportion, the 2/3 of people believing there's going to be a second recession, the political consequence of that is that people are starting to blame the cuts for that.
And too far, too fast is, of course, the rubric of the New Labour opposition. Is it translating into a bigger lead for them?
It is. For most of the polls, not all of them, but for most of the polls, Labour are ahead. Not by a huge amount, but they are ahead. And if you had a general election tomorrow, you'd probably see a Labour victory, albeit not a very big one. However, I think that there are good signs that the Labour lead is a little soft. A lot of it is built on discontented Lib Dem voters shifting towards the Labour Party. And it's also worth noting that Ed Miliband's personal ratings are not particularly great. A lot of the public don't particularly know who he is. A lot of the public who do know who he is aren't particularly impressed by him. So I think that there's some reasons to say that the Labour lead in the polls is a little soft. But having said that, they are ahead, and if we were to have an election tomorrow, they would probably win.
And remind me, where do the Lib Dems stand in public opinion at this moment?
Well, considerably worse than a year ago. It's worth saying that the Liberal Democrats got quite a big boost in the polls prior to the last general election. Nick Clegg rode a great wave of public popularity, which he's now lost. Around a third of the people who say that they voted for the Liberal Democrats at the last general election now say that they would not. They've lost, and particularly when you consider how small the Lib Dem vote share is anyway, that's quite a lot of people to lose and quite a significant loss. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that we're still quite a long way away from a general election. If the coalition agreement holds, there won't be another general election for a little under 4 years. So the polls at this stage are more likely to tell us what the political mood music is than what the result of an election would be. But having said that, the Lib Dems are definitely less popular than they were a year ago, or certainly before the election.
And they would have to make the calculation, is that nosedive going to be able to be pulled out of, or would they be better cutting their losses and cutting their role in the coalition government, which would, of course, make a general election much earlier?
Absolutely. But if I'm a Lib Dem politician, I'm going to look at the polls right now and think, why would I want a general election? I'm in a worse situation than I was a year ago. It's more likely that I'll lose my seat, rather than if I can hang around for a little bit, hope the economy picks up, and hope that the public give me some credit for it. So I think that there are still a good number of reasons why the Liberal Democrats will stick in the coalition. But you're absolutely right. The worse things get for them, the more likely it is that some of them, not all of them, but some of them will start to rebel. And absolutely, if they vote against the government and we have another general election, then we all start again.
Yes, and of course they've got this Dauphin, this leader in waiting, Simon Hughes, who is president of their party, who just might become more of a serial rebel.
I mean, it's difficult to predict with these things. We obviously have we had the AV referendum earlier this year, which a number of people predicted would be a point of conflict for the coalition. The Lib Dems, who of course supported the change to the alternative vote system, lost that referendum, and yet we still had the coalition. There are many points along the road now which we could see further rebellions, and it's difficult to say with certainty. But if it was my money, if I was betting on it, I'd say that it will go till 2015, and that by that time the Conservatives will be hoping, and so will the Lib Dems, that the economy has recovered sufficiently that they can take credit for it.
Well, I think you're right at this point, but as we're discovering every day or every week, the truth of Harold Wilson's great saying, that a week's a long time in politics, in Libya and in Britain. Tom Black, thanks very much indeed. He's the research manager at Comres, one of the country's top pollsters, who's talking there about the poll which shows almost 2/3 of British people believe that the UK is heading for another recession, and of course many people believe that we never actually left the last one. Text, George, I heard you today on Keys and Grey and found out a new side of you. I may not agree with everything you say. I still listen and learn from your views. I thought you were excellent at the Senate. It opened my eyes to a different view and angle of you and what you stand for. Top man, top cat, keep doing what you do. Loyal listener, Neil in Wimbledon. Thanks for that, Neil. I was for a whole hour, actually, on Keys and Grey this morning, and you can listen to it on the website. I was punting my new book, Open Season, the story of Neil Lennon's extraordinary first season as the Celtic manager, which almost put his career up in a puff of deadly smoke. If you want to know more about that, go to my site on Facebook, George Galloway MP on Facebook, and you'll be able to order the book there. Or write to me at office@georgegalloway.com. Well, that's the first hour by, but we've got 2 more hours to go, and we're talking about the very biggest subjects, not just in our country, but in the world. 08717 22 3344 is the number to call. 81089 is the number to text, or write to me through the website at talksport.co.uk. Well, you're listening to The Week with me, George Galloway, on Talk Sport, every Friday between 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning. It has been a most extraordinary week, but then I find myself saying that more or less every week. And I'm looking at my 2 television sets that Laura has set to BBC and Sky, and there's bombs in Canterbury, there's bombs in Abuja, there's war in Libya and Afghanistan, war in Iraq, the possibility of war in Palestine, over Gaza. My goodness, 10 years on from 9/11, the anniversary being in just a couple of weeks from now. The world is a still more dangerous place. Well, at least here we try to get to the bottom of things. We try to get to the nub of things. We try to take these issues and shake them free of the spin and the disinformation and cut right to the heart of the matter. And that's why we need your calls. 08717 223344, or text me on 81089, or write to me through the website at talksport.co.uk.
Week with George Galloway on Talk Sport.
Well, let's go straight to Greenwich and Paula for her point of view on the economy. Paula, welcome.
Hello, George. Yes, it's the first time I'm speaking to you. I really love your show.
Thank you.
For some time now, the government knew about the economic position. And so what I think is that they set out to have these wars, knowing that these countries are rich, not only in oil, but money. So when these places have been well and good demolished, they will have to pay the West well and good for their expertise, and the West will see the sun and moon shine again.
Well, I think that's a very shrewd analysis. I don't disagree with one word of that. I only make 2 points, Paula. First of all, there's what used to be known by people like Carl and Plasto and me as inter-imperialist rivalry. In other words, the junta in Libya, which has been put in power by the NATO operation, will have many mouths to feed. The French capitalists, the Italian capitalists, the United States capitalists, as well as the British, will all want feeding. And it may turn out to be beyond this junta to satisfy everyone. And secondly, that depends on the Libyan people agreeing to being governed by a stooge outfit who gives away the wealth and the power in its country to the Western Axis. Now, I think myself that they're, to put it as George W. Bush once did, they're misunderestimating the Libyan people, and they're misunderestimating the Libyan revolutionaries, very, very many of whom, I can promise you, have no love for the West at all, Paula.
Right.
So we'll see.
Yes, we'll see. Let's wait and see.
Well, look, thanks for your call.
Because another thing is, when they had the riots here recently, just as a gentleman said before, as soon as I heard about it, it's exactly what I said to my partner. I said, you know what, the boys have made their arrangements and then ran away on holiday.
Of course, it's part of the crisis of Western governmental systems that nobody believes anything that they say, even when they're telling the truth. And people blame them for things that they cannot possibly be responsible for. And I don't agree with you that these riots were somehow got up by David Cameron or the government. What I am sure of, and I think we'll agree on that, is that the government will make every use that it can of these riots to seize unto themselves unwarranted powers to further destroy British liberty. Now, here's the aforementioned legend, Carl in Plasto. Carl, welcome back.
Good evening,
Hi.
George. A couple of points. First of all, the Sheikh of Arabi, Fats Waller, would be
Fats Waller, the Sheikh of Arabi. Let's see if we can find that. Yeah, brilliant.
A beauty. As, on the economy, you know, what the people are aware, where the Tories might not be, of the simple truth that unemployment causes unemployment.
Yes.
How they thought they could possibly sack hundreds of thousands of public sector workers and remove their purchasing power from the market and not watch it snowball, you know, is wishful thinking, to put it charitably, you know.
Yes, yes.
And the double standards that you referred to, I just having to think about this. Can you imagine what we would be saying if 333 people had died in Chinese police custody and there was only one prosecution? Yeah? We'd be screaming about human rights.
Is this the figures for London or Britain?
Britain, 310 years, 333.
Over 10 years. That's a lot of deaths.
One prosecution.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what they'd be saying if Cuba was tagging its young people? You know? Could you imagine what they'd be saying if North Korea had anywhere near the amount of CCTV that we've got? You know? And which part of the Mediterranean is in the North Atlantic? I don't get this, you know. And which country of NATO is being threatened? NATO is supposed to be a defensive. Nobody seems to have picked up on this. Just get away with the brazen.
Yeah.
NATO is a defensive alliance set up to protect any country attacked from the east, any member of NATO. No NATO country is being threatened or even pretended to be threatened by Libya. You know? This is an absolute, illegal nonsense. It's just imperial power.
It's blatantly illegal. It's a blatant breach of the UN Security Council Resolution 1973, which provided for a no-fly zone to stop attacks upon civilians,
right,
which has become an all-out assault on Sirte with British forces on the ground, even if they're not wearing boots.
Cameron called the Al-Qaeda cowardly, you know. Suicide bombers. Well, that ain't cowardly, but dropping bombs from 20,000 feet onto civilians, that's what I call cowardice. Yeah?
Very brave, yeah. Carl, as always, many, many thanks. Here's Robert in Belfast, who makes the point that Cameron's 4 holidays, but we're all in it together. We're all in it together, Robert, aren't we?
Oh, how are you doing, George?
I'm fine. Good to hear from you.
Well, George, I'd like to briefly just talk about David Cameron and Libya. We're all in this together, and I hope everybody has enjoyed their 4 holidays, and the year's not out yet. We all could have some more holidays before the year's out, George.
Indeed.
You know, we're definitely all in this together, and I hope everybody across all these islands have enjoyed their 4 holidays. Now, George, what about the American rebels and the British rebels in Libya? Now, let's get real here. If Libya was full of bananas, I don't believe the American rebels and the British rebels would be in it. More to the point, North Libya, there's a place called Qatar, and over this past lot of months, they've just discovered going to be one of the biggest oil fields in the world. Now, we have to ask questions. Is America and Britain flying over, dropping weapons in for the rebels and dropping what you would call their mercenaries in and fighting the good war, as they see it, against Colonel Gaddafi? Will Colonel Gaddafi finish up like Osama bin Laden?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to find him, Robert. I don't know if he's still in Libya. He may still be now, but will he stay there? Here's my guess, that when the point comes that it's militarily hopeless for him to continue in Libya, he'll leave. I presume he's got a few bob put away for a rainy day such as this, and I presume that he'll use that few bob to set up an external political opposition, which will have an internal reflection, which is, of course, armed, as everybody in Libya, men and women, are armed and trained to use those weapons. And I believe that there will be a long period of attrition and war in Libya. And I repeat the point that I made earlier. It would be the gravest folly if Britain were to join that occupation. Here's Hussein in Birmingham, though, who makes the point that not all Libyans hate the West. He's up next, but after this. Now, it's been another record-breaking year for GCSEs in England, Wales and the north of Ireland. More students than ever have passed. The number of young people securing top grades has also increased. These pupils at Perryfields High School in Oldbury in the West Midlands were among those who picked up their results.
Really hard work, but I got there.
I got like my A's and that, and my B's and C's, but my English was the only one that let me down.
I thought I weren't going to do good, and I did good.
Now, let me go quickly to Hussein in Birmingham, whom I identified as the next speaker. Hussein, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. How are you?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for raising the point about Libya. I just been listening to you. Actually, I'm a Libyan. The Libyans. You mentioned something about the Libyans that the revolutionaries are not with the West. I am one of the Libyans, and we really like to appreciate the Westerns for what they did and the intervention of NATO. Because without NATO, Gaddafi will be still in power. And as you know, he's been on power for 42 years, and we just appreciate what the West did. I am a doctor, and all the revolutionaries are normal Libyans, some of which doctors and engineers, and I don't think they hate the West. I mean, we really appreciate what you did for us, and we really thank you very much for what
Well, don't include me in that, Hussein. I didn't support NATO and never will support NATO. Let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may.
No, can I just add something, please?
Yes.
I mean, imagine without the intervention of NATO, what the Libyans would be now. I mean, Gaddafi is going to kill all the Libyans, slaughter all the Libyans.
No, I don't think he had the power to slaughter all the Libyans. I don't think the Libyans would. I don't think the Libyans.
He showed some of it. He showed some of it. We see it right now.
I don't think. Well, let's have a dialogue, Hussein. You speak and I speak, okay, but not at the same time. I don't think that Gaddafi had the power to kill all the Libyans, and I don't think that the Libyans would have agreed and allowed him to kill them all. I think that there might not have been a victory for the revolution, which I support, would not have been a victory so quickly, and Gaddafi bears the responsibility for having militarized this uprising in the first place. Of that I'm in no doubt, and I've been clear about that from the start. But let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. Do you think that NATO did this out of the goodness of their heart?
Well, we can say that there's something behind it, but we don't mind being a Libyan to pay them. I mean, if they want to share our oil, they are welcome. No problem. Because
what share do you think they deserve?
No, okay. If it comes to me, I lived, we've been under Gaddafi for 42 years. We've never enjoyed the outcome of the oil anyway.
Well, that's not true, is it? Because that's not true, because Libya is actually the most developed country in Africa.
I don't think that's true, Mr. Galloway.
Oh, I can assure you it's true. I've looked at all the statistics.
No, compare Libya. Sorry, Mr. Galloway, let me say this, if you excuse me. Compare Libya with South Africa. Compare Libya with Kenya. Compare Libya with Egypt.
It's much higher than all of them. You're just wrong, Hussein. You're no doubt a very good doctor, but you don't know much about economics. I'm telling you that in all the indices, Libya is the most developed country in Africa. However, as I've said many times, Gaddafi should have made every Libyan a multi-millionaire, and he has had enough money and a small enough population that every Libyan should have been like a Saudi prince, and Libya should look like Dubai, but doesn't. But it looks.
They are not. We have the worst educational system in the world. We have the worst medical health in the world. I mean, we.
Well, you don't look, Hussein, we're going to have to tell the truth to each other. Libya has 88% level of literacy. That's better than every country in Africa, and it's better than most Arab countries.
You know how much do we get? I mean,
No, just answer that point, will you?
Do you want to know?
Hussein, just answer that point. Libya has 88% literacy, which is the highest in Africa by far, and higher than many other Arab countries. So how could you have had the worst education system in the world? How could you?
No, this is just put on papers. I mean, if you see that...
What, do you think the Libyans are illiterate?
Mr. Galloway, have you visited Libya?
I have visited Libya many times, and I know that the Libyan people are a highly educated people.
I don't think they are.
Well, what do you think they are? Uneducated?
No, they are educated, but see our health system, see our even the sewage, we have no sewage like everybody else. We have nothing. You know, I get 400 Libyan dinar being a doctor. I am an assistant professor. I only get 400 Libyan dinar. Do you know how much 400 Libyan dinar? It's only $250 per month. That's what I get being a Libyan. Where is all our oil?
No, well, exactly. I've many times asked this question. Every time I've been in Libya, I look around and I ask, where is all the money from the oil? Where could it possibly have gone? Well, a lot of it has been stolen by the Gaddafi family. A lot of it has been wasted on grandiose and ultimately failed infrastructural and developmental projects. A lot of it has been given away to all sorts of dubious organizations and even countries, many of them in Africa during his long period of seeking to be the king of Africa. I'm not arguing here that Gaddafi is a success story. I'm just saying to you, and I want to get back to this, you said you're ready to share Libya's oil with NATO. And I'm asking you what share you think they deserve.
I don't object. I welcome Libya, I welcome the British, I welcome the Americans, I welcome the West into Libya. I am with this idea. I want them to share our oil because we have not enjoyed the oil so far.
Do you think if you share it with them... Well, let's compare Iraq. Iraq's oil was nationalized and now it's privatized. And Iraq's oil that used to be owned by the state is now owned by private oil companies, almost all of them foreign. Is that what you want in Libya?
No, I want being a Libyan, I want to enjoy our oil. I don't mind if the British companies come to Libya, if the American companies come to Libya. We don't want the Russians, we don't want the Chinese, we only want the Westerns. That's my opinion. That's the opinion of most people.
I tell you what, Hussein, why don't we bring back the king, the stooge king, and why not let NATO rule you? Why not go the whole hog and ask Italy if you can be a colony again?
No, it's not a matter of being a colony or ruling, NATO ruling us. Thank you we thank NATO for the intervention, and we don't mind, as Libyans, for our oil to be shared with the Western.
Well, that's Cameron will be rubbing his hands down on his holiday in Cornwall to hear you, Hussein.
We really like
but I'm
Cameron.
just wondering, you really like Cameron? Do you really like Berlusconi too?
Yes, we like Berlusconi. We like Cameron.
And you really like Sarkozy. Are you sure? Are you sure you're a doctor, or are you in Ward 5 in Broadmoor?
Look.
You like Berlusconi. Look, you want to share your oil with the West. You like Berlusconi. You're probably the only person in the world who likes Berlusconi, but you said it on national radio. You like Sarkozy, and you really like David Cameron. And there's not many people who like all three of those. So I'm saying to you, I'm listening to you very carefully, and I'm asking you, why don't you go the whole hog? Why don't you bring back the king who will rule your country in the interests of the foreigners that used to occupy you? Why not, Hussein?
Galloway, yes, I appreciate what you say, but being a Libyan ruled under Gaddafi, we suffered a lot under Gaddafi.
I know that.
And we need somebody to save us.
Why do you need somebody to save you? First of all, you're describing your own people as ignorant. Your own people, you're denying that 88% of them are literate. And that's a strange thing for anybody to do. And secondly, you don't think that there's a third option here. A third option which says we're not going to be ruled by a dictator like Gaddafi. Neither are we going to be ruled by Sarkozy, Berlusconi and Cameron. We're actually going to be a free, sovereign, independent, Arab, Muslim country with some pride, for God's sake. Some pride in yourselves.
No, I didn't mention that I want to be ruled by Sarkozy. I said we like Sarkozy for their intervention for overthrowing Gaddafi.
No,
you
said
Gaddafi
you want them to share your oil.
What's wrong with sharing our oil?
Because it's your oil, for God's sake. It's your oil. It's Libyan oil. Why should you share it with Berlusconi?
Oh my God. I don't know. Listen to me, please, Mr. Galloway. Listen to me, please.
I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you. My eyes are popping out of my head.
Listen to me, please. Just give me a few minutes. We have the oil under our land, okay? We need Western companies not to share. Call it share, but we need Western companies to come to Libya and to buy the oil. No problem.
Look, they were already buying the oil, Hussein. I mean, Gaddafi wasn't eating the oil. He was already selling it to the Western countries.
Yes, but we're not enjoying it.
But you're not going to enjoy it if it's handed over to Western oil companies. I'm saying it again now, as clearly as I can. Why don't you shake yourself free of this slavish colonial mentality and say, we had 40 years of brute dictatorship and now we've overthrown it, but we're not going to live under anybody else's tutelage. We're going to be a proud, independent, sovereign, free, Arab, Muslim country, and we're going to govern ourselves in a self-respecting way. Why don't you say that, Hussein?
We will be, Mr. Galloway, we will be governed ourselves by ourselves.
Get off your knees, for God's sake. George, be fair, it's not the number of holidays, it's the number of days. I get 26 days, which could be 5 holidays. Is that too many for me? Asks Ian in Brighton, fairly. No, I think when you're the Prime Minister, it's different. I mean, I think when you're the Prime Minister of a country that's involved in 2 wars, is on the brink of a double-dip recession, and which just a fortnight ago was in flames at the hands of rioters, that actually you really should be on the job. And if you're not going to be on the job, you really should have a rather more convincing deputy on the bridge than Nick Clegg. That's just my point of view. I want to hear yours. 08717 223344. Major changes to Facebook's privacy controls are being described as baby steps. A computer security expert says measures, which include giving users the opportunity to approve posts before they appear on their profile, don't go far enough. Graham Cluley from online security company Sophos says he'd like to see more protection for users.
Facebook love to present themselves as a country. They love to talk about themselves in that tone. Well, a real country has social services and police and infrastructure to look after people. Well, if Facebook's going to have 800 million users, they better start looking after that community as well.
Now, Graham Jones is an internet psychologist, which is a job that's never going to go out of fashion in the future, that's for sure. It's been an incredible few weeks for social networking sites used by both rioters and the police. And sites like Twitter and Facebook, of course, are part of a debate which polarizes people. Are they a force for good or evil, or is it a bit like nuclear technology? It can't be uninvented. You can't uninvent the wheel. Graham specializes in internet psychology, online behavior, and attitudes. So we thought he'd be a great man to talk to, and he's kindly been hanging on. Graham, thanks for that.
That's okay, George. Good evening.
Good evening to you, my friend. Now, first of all, how serious is this government proposal to take unto itself the power to basically shut these networks down?
Well, they clearly think it's serious, but if they do think it's serious, they clearly don't understand the Internet.
That's possible.
Because even though they technically may be able to shut it down in this country, well, it's quite easy to log on via what's called a proxy server in another country. So, they can shut it down, but anybody who really wants to use it can use it.
They can restrict access to it, as a pedant has pointed out to me. It's not shutting down, it's restricting access.
Yeah, it's restricting access. In China, there's this great firewall of China that restricts access, but there's 100 million Chinese people who managed to break through that wall, which of course is, getting on for twice our population. So there's an awful lot of Chinese people who managed to get through their security systems. So governments can think they can do something about it, but really, the cat is out of the bag now, and what they need to do is not concentrate on trying to restrict it, but trying to engage with us through it. And I think one of the big things that governments have consistently failed to do, everywhere really in the world, is to use these networks to engage with people, to support them, to find out what they want, to do all kinds of different things. They think they're engaging by having a little petition for 100,000 people or whatever, but that's just, that's really a bit of a publicity stunt. It's not real engagement with real people.
Yeah, of course I hear what you're saying, and in theory that's, I'm sure, correct. But my experience, not least from 6 years sitting in this seat, is that most people, many people actually hate the government, hate whatever government is in power, and have no intention whatsoever of engaging with it across the social networking sites. And a very large number of people are completely apathetic towards the state. Only a very small number of people any longer are interested in an engagement with the state. But I suppose that's a debate for another night. What I'm more puzzled about is the apparent inability of the state, the government at least, to see that it's actually better to be able to read these things. Just to give you a small example, Graham, I just 10 minutes ago reported yet another blood-curdling threat to murder me, which was posted on my Facebook site.
Yeah.
Now, every time that happens, I give it to the police, and the police arrest the person who did it.
Yep.
So it's actually far better to be able to read and see these things all in one place, a one-click shop, where you can actually round up all the potential murderers in one go.
Absolutely. These social networks have really helped the police in many instances find people doing all sorts of misdemeanors and crimes. There was even a case a couple of years ago of a burglar who went onto his Facebook account and boasted about all the things that he'd stolen, which was not only great for the police, but showed us how dumb that person was.
Shows us the success of our education system.
Nobody else was reading his boasts. So, yes, it does help people find things that have gone wrong. So, whereas without the internet, these things go underground and they then become much more difficult to police and control. So actually, it gives society an opportunity to make sure that those nastier parts of society can be dealt with.
I'm sure that's correct. Give us some scale, Graham, of the usage of these things. I've got 100,000 people, more or less, following me on Facebook and Twitter.
Yep.
That's a phenomenal audience for me. 5-6 times a day whenever I feel like opining. I know that there's 800 million Facebook users in the world. What's the scale of usage in Britain, and is it spread across the demographics of age and class and so on?
Yeah, interestingly, the only age group who actually log on to Facebook every single day and use it every single day are those aged over 65.
Oh, my goodness.
So we get this kind of view that Facebook is for teenagers.
Yeah.
But actually, it really is representative of society. And the reason that they're logging on is because they've got more time.
Yeah.
Everybody else is at work, kind of thing.
Yeah, but is everybody at work not actually also logged on?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about companies who try and switch off Facebook, what they've forgotten is that everybody in the office has got a mobile phone, and so they can switch it off the system, but they can log on via their mobile phone. And I know that one company has discovered that people seem to be spending longer in the toilet these days since they switched Facebook off.
Amazing.
Because they're obviously, nipping out to the loo to log on to Facebook without being spotted by the boss. So actually productivity goes up in businesses when they switch Facebook back on.
Wow. Now tell me, what are the main impacts in your view of this new social networking media?
It's actually making people more social.
That's a surprise.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we find is that when people use these networks, they're actually using them to get together with more people. So the most social people on Facebook, for instance, actually do more real-world socializing. And that's not really much of a surprise because they're social networks. They attract very sociable people. And so what they're doing is they're, arranging meetings, dinners, going down the pub, parties, whatever it is. And so the very sociable people have become more sociable. So we're actually becoming more sociable. There's another couple of other hidden things. Because they're text-heavy, people are reading more than they've ever done before. We've got the generation now coming through schools that are reading more than they have ever done previously, because they have to in order to engage with people using the internet.
And are they reading the language as it should be written?
Well, we can debate that. There was actually an interesting study that was only published last week about, the kind of language that you see on Twitter or text language and so on. Does that affect children's ability to spell and their grammatical ability? It does appear to, except for one thing. When we take out what's known as, the technical term is phonemes, how we hear words when we read them, because when you read something, you sometimes hear the word in your head when you're reading it.
Some people's lips move.
And people's lips move. The people who are finding it most difficult to actually get their language right, as it were, outside of social networks or outside of texting, are the people who have the least ability to hear the words. So when we hear the words, when we're good at hearing words when we see them in print, actually it doesn't change our ability to write what you might call properly outside these systems. When we can't hear the words when we read them, that's when we're difficult. And the big thing there is that children who are really good at hearing words are the ones whose mums and dads and people read to them a lot when they're quite young.
Well, some things never change, huh? Look, Graham, I always say to guests, it's been interesting talking to you, but I don't always mean it. But tonight, speaking to an internet psychologist, I really do mean it.
Very kind of you.
Thanks very much, Graham Jones, internet psychologist, talking to us about the uses, good and bad, of the new social media, which the government is discussing taking plans to restrict our access to in political conditions that they see fit. Here's Annie in Luton.
Hello, George.
Hi, Annie.
Are you there?
I'm very well. Good to hear from you.
I'm hoping, darling, that you will get the record straight.
Okay, go on.
Now, this is it. We did not vote for Tony Blair, per se. He didn't win 3 elections. We voted Labour 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that right? So why is he getting all the glory?
Well, it's right up to a point. I mean, clearly there were more millions voted for Mr. Blair and as the leader in 97 than had voted in 92 or indeed in the subsequent general elections. So you could argue that there was a Blair effect which put Labour up to 13 million votes in 1997. It's a long time since they were able to poll that number.
But, George, isn't that because we were sick and we wanted the other guy, the other lot out?
I agree. I think so.
Why are you getting all the glory? Please, George.
I think that John Smith would have got a very big Labour majority had he lived, but probably not quite as big as Tony Blair managed to get.
But he didn't get it for him. He got it. It was the Labour Party we were voting for, not for him per se.
Well, you say that, but that daft woman that you had as the MP in Luton that left in disgrace.
Oh my goodness!
I can't remember her name
Margaret
now.
Moran.
Moran, eminently forgettable. You're not really saying that the people of Luton were streaming out to vote for Margaret Moran. They were voting for her because she had the Labour rosette on.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, you've said it very well, Annie. Thanks very much
George.
indeed for that. Glyn from Birkenhead says, George, great show as usual. You always get me out of the pub early. My song for the end of the show would be Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction. Pessimistic, but a very good call. I need your suggestions for a song that would sum up the week. 08717 223344. That's the number to call me. 81089 is the number to text. Or write to me free through the website at talksport.co.uk. The Liverpool manager, Kenny Dalglish, has welcomed the news that government documents relating to the Hillsborough disaster will be made public. Ministers have agreed to sanction the release of papers that give details of cabinet discussions in the aftermath of the tragedy. 96 Liverpool fans died in a crush at Sheffield Wednesday Stadium in 1989. Kenny, who was also the club's manager at that time, says common sense has prevailed.
It's fantastic news for the families, and I think, without me trying to be political, I think this isn't a political issue anyway. It's a humanitarian one.
Kenny Dalglish. Marek in Hove says, where did you get that literacy stat from? Libyan State TV? No, Marek, I got it from the United Nations. Gordon in Glasgow says, George, praise must also go to the camera crew of Alex Crawford. Indeed, so. George, it makes perfect sense to intervene where our economic interests lie. I'm tired of the deliberate naivety of the usual rent-a-mouth, useful idiot commies. Does he mean me? Who moan that it's all about oil? Of course it is. And long may we send our gunboats and planes to where it suits us. So let's get what we can out of Libya. If we don't grab this oil, then China and India may. Regards, William in Stevenage. Oh, Hussein in Birmingham. I hope you're still listening. Now, Tommy in Glasgow's been waiting a long time. Let's hear from him. If I can just get this screen to turn red. Tommy, welcome back.
Assalamu alaikum, George.
Alaikum salam.
Eid Mubarak to all the Muslims when it comes in the next week.
Yep.
And for all the good people looking for Laylatul Qadr, the night of power, may they get their wishes. For a tune at the end of the show, George, Radiohead Creep. For all the creeps who brought on what they suggest is now mission creep, you know, from a NATO, you know, from NATO bombing to protect people from dying. You know, it's totally laughable how they set the agenda out. Yes. And then how
someone once said it's like having sex for virginity.
And this is serious, George. It's a coup d'etat. This is a criminal act. This is, and they've been doing it for, you know, countless years. You know, been installing puppet governments, puppet regimes, and in that area, you know, I would suggest to you there's probably maybe about 3,000 to 5,000 special forces from Mossad, CIA, MI6, and Al-Qaeda. You know, look at what has been going on in the world. We've been told for the last 10 years how Al-Qaeda is such a terrible lot of people, and yet, you know, they've been bombing our troops and still in Afghanistan and in Iraq and American troops, yet now we have Al-Qaeda in Libya, best friends saddling up to MI6 and the CIA. Well, they're now their best friends, and this is we've been sleepwalked into what's now going to be a war of attrition similar to Iraq, and we have people still just now disputing the fact that the genocide that happened in Iraq was similar to what happened in Rwanda. So what we're facing just now, unless we go and march and try and stop this and do stuff to stop it, because not in my name, not in your name, and not in all the good people's names who don't want another war of attrition similar to Afghanistan, similar to Iraq. It's got to be stopped, George, because this is, you know, it's a scandal how these creeps, how these shysters in suits can go about with their wanton wars of aggression. You know, just because they've got gold and because they've got the black gold and the gas there, doesn't mean that we have to go and invade another country.
Well, of course, it's not the first and it won't be the last, Tommy. Powerful stuff. Thanks for that. And a happy Eid to you on Wednesday, I think, when it comes. Here's Michael in Belfast. Michael, go ahead, sir. Hi there.
George, sorry to speak to you. You're a great man. I wish we could clone you and have more of you about the world.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks.
Just two quick points, George. I felt sorry for what he's saying a couple of calls ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just euphoric about getting rid of Gaddafi, and that he really doesn't understand the implications of America, England, and France of what their interest is in this conflict. And there was just another point, George. You were talking about the BBC.
Yes.
I watched coverage a couple of days ago. You're right in what you say that coverage is about. There was three bodies lying on the ground with their hands tied, and the first thing they said was this was a result of the Gaddafi loyalists and what to do when they capture people and stuff. And it was at the Western News the next day, and it was a very quick word about it to say that they weren't and that it was really revenge. And it was so
Yes,
public
that's
that
reflected, Michael, in the papers tomorrow. I see the front page of The Independent has that. It's clear that there are massacres taking place, conducted by both sides in this conflict, which always happens, of course, in civil wars, which is one of the reasons why it's never wise to get involved with them. Michael, thanks for the call. Now, look, the only way is Essex for UFOs. Tony Topping is a UFO specialist. He might be able to shed some light for us on how come Stansted area seems to be such a hotbed of UFO activity. Tony, welcome.
Yeah, welcome, George. It's always a pleasure to come on.
And to you, sir, and to you. Now tell us what these newly released files show, would you?
Yeah, exactly, yes. Well, what it is that the government have released some... Well, actually, there's recently two things, really, George. There's been a recent flap in the Stansted area of UFO activity, of which a radio presenter from the BBC on another station, who's to do with the sports section, was commenting on this, that he was driving to the radio station 15 to 20 miles out of away from Stansted. He saw this great big light, which he believed was a plane at first, until it banked, till it turned around, and then he discovered that it was actually a triangular craft of some description, and it had a very strange light configuration on it, because under our aviation rules, aircraft have got to have a correct coloured strobing sequence, but this didn't. And what's happened is that the British government have released under the National Archives information regarding various incidents that have happened with UFOs, including, which I find quite comical, Churchill, when you do the real deep research into it, Churchill being actually fobbed off by the Americans about the UFO situation, but that's another story. But the one item that happened is they released something that happened on June the 30th in 1990 at Stansted, or near Stansted Airport again, where a member of the RAF personnel and his uncle were out fishing, and it was round about 2:40 in the morning on June the 30th. And what they've done is they've released the archive to say that they saw an object flying over them, oblong and in all different colours. And to this day, they've still wondered what it was, and the MOD routinely filed that report. Interestingly enough, because I know on this programme your listeners like to get to the bottom of things, I was told of a situation whereby air traffic controllers currently, under Civil Aviation Authority rules, you may be familiar with air traffic control, George, I don't know whether you are, but basically every aircraft carries a squawk identification number, and that reflects on their radar screen. But the air traffic controller in question was told on the hush-hush that if he sees a radar blip that he can't account for, that's not giving a squawk identification number or a friend or foe identification number to the airport's radar system, he must disregard it, not bother with it, and not even report it.
But why would the state be so disinterested?
The state disinterested, you say, George?
Yes.
The state are not disinterested. The state are very, very interested indeed.
But why would they want to cover these things up? Surely that would be the biggest story ever told.
I think so, but I think when you're dealing with hidden power agendas that are currently raping the Libyan people, tearing apart Iraq, tearing apart Iran, they're on the rampage, I would think that this controlling paradigm has a key interest in keeping UFOs covered up. And they definitely have a vested agenda there. When you look, for example, George, at something known as back-engineered technology, for example, back to the Stansted issue again, it was indicated that that this aircraft, there's actually footage of two people driving down the motorway on the M11 on my YouTube site. If your listeners put in Tony Ops UFO, that's Tony OPS UFO, and go to my YouTube site, they will see footage of a man driving down the M11 with a video camera, and all of a sudden these free-flying objects, free balls of light, start whizzing around and flying off. It's spectacular, absolutely spectacular footage. And it kind of like demonstrates that these things are present in our skies at all times.
Well, look, what we're now finding, I mentioned earlier, Tony, if you were listening, we found this planet 5 times bigger than the Earth, which is entirely composed of diamond.
Yes.
We're finding that there's water on Mars. The essentials of, and of course if there's water, there's oxygen. The essentials of life it's becoming clear, are not only present in this tiny little planet that we call Mother Earth.
Yes.
So the possibility, indeed likelihood,
Yes.
that somewhere out there
Yep.
there has to be
Yep.
other life.
Yep.
You think in your lifetime we might get somewhere on this?
I think we might, George. I think we possibly might. I know, for example, that the British government, or the British state, as it were, the MOD, did a very serious project called Project Condign, which was commonly called Project Contradiction, as some people call it. And what they did is they invested millions into this big research project as to what UFOs were. They concluded that some of them could be explained by misidentification of common objects, weather balloons, aircraft, top-secret craft, but they concluded that it was possibly a supernormal meteorological phenomenon that science did not understand.
Well, you've helped us, as always, Tony, to get closer to the truth. Well, I'll be back after the news with the last hour of the week. Well, you're listening to The Week, and what an extraordinary week it has been. This is George Galloway. I'm here every Friday night between 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning, and only on TalkSport, the Sony Academy radio station of the year. And it's a pleasure to be here. I was in here earlier with the legendary Andy Gray and Richard Keys on Keys and Gray, talking about my new book on the Neil Lennon affair, which saw the Celtic manager receiving bombs and bullets in the post. If you're interested, go to George Galloway MP on Facebook. And Facebook and Twitter is one of the things that we're talking about tonight, after the government brought in the top officials from these companies to tell them, read them the Riot Act in a way, and tell them that the government may take powers to restrict access to them at times that they judge it to be politically expedient. We're talking about the opinion poll, which showed that almost 2/3 of you think that Britain is in for a double-dip recession. And some think we haven't even come out of the first. We're talking, of course, about Libya, about UFOs, especially in the Essex area. The only way is Essex for the little green men. And I see Sally Bercow has fallen at the first hurdle. And later we'll be talking about Steve Jobs, standing down as the head honcho in Apple, which he has built into the most valuable corporation in the world. It's all in The Week with George Galloway on TalkSport.
Week with George Galloway on TalkSport.
Now, let me read some of the mountain of paperwork I've got here. George, I can't believe what I was hearing from that Hussein fella. Was he really a doctor? I can't believe that. He really needs to grow a pair. You were right to tell him to get off his knees. Being also from a former colonial state myself, Hussein is the type of fawning, grovelling idiot who retard progress because they're so keen to keep our countries lying down, dependent and grovelling at the feet of their former colonial masters. That's from Carlisle in Ilford. But Paul in Chalfont says, George, be honest. I've just texted. Our PM does not have holidays. He may be in Cornwall, but he is still linked up to base. Come on, be fair for once. And an anonymous texter says, idiot, George, the man did not mean share oil. He meant sell to West for helping them defeat Gaddafi, and not to sell to your mates, Russia and China. Unfortunately, Mr. Anonymous, the oil was already being sold to the West. The man said share, and he said it over and over and over. George, Ken from Wigan here. Your discussion with Hussein has got to be one of the best I've heard you have. Bless him, he just couldn't get it. Peace and prayers to all the Libyan people. I hope the transition is not too costly in lives for them. Keep up the great show. Thanks, Ken. And Jimmy, the Chihuahua, says, evening, George. You've lost that one. Maybe if you and your nearest and dearest had 40-odd years of oppression, you may have a better comprehension of what the Libyan doctor was trying to convey. Well, of course, Jimmy, the Chihuahua, I've been against Gaddafi A lot longer than the leaders of NATO have. GG, a few vibes for you. Squire, to sum up the week. Boy George. Oh, war is stupid. Frankie goes to Hollywood. When two tribes go to war. Bob Marley, One Love, or Buffalo Soldier. Alicia Keys, Empire State of Mind. Old Blue Eyes, New York, New York. Genesis, Tell Me Why. And for Call Me Dave, Summer Holiday by Sir Cliff Richard. That's a good one. Because, of course, I'm taking a strong line on the absence of the Prime Minister from the bridge, not least because of the calibre of the number 2 that he's left in charge. Ian in Gloucester says, George, you talk so much sense, you're like a breath of fresh air. If only more people could see through the smoke screen to see and tell it how it is. I'm a convert after the press tried to destroy you a few years ago. Keep up the good work and telling it how it is. Thanks, Ian in Gloucester, for that. Let's hear from Benjamin in Dunfermline, in Fife.
Hello, George.
Yes, hello, Benjamin. Go ahead.
Oh, you've got shares in BA Systems.
No, I've not got any shares in anything.
They supplied the missiles to NATO to destroy the missiles that was supplied to Gaddafi. Now they'll have to restock the missiles to the NATO.
It's nice work if you can get it.
Restock the Libyan missiles. So they're bound to be on a fortune.
It's nice work if you can get it. War is profitable for some, isn't it?
But maybe Gaddafi will sue them because the missiles didn't work. It didn't bring down any NATO planes, did they?
Well, that's a good point, but I'm not sure he's in a position to sue anybody, Ben.
Oh, well. And a song for the end of the show.
Yeah.
John Denver for Gaddafi, I'm leaving on a jet plane.
Leaving on it. I bet he wishes he could leave on a jet plane. Benjamin in Dunfermline, thanks for that. Here's Tony in Enfield, always worth hearing. Tone, on you go.
Yeah, good morning, George.
Morning.
Great programme,
Thanks,
great
Paul.
callers.
Thanks.
I do support Tommy that phoned in, but a couple of points. I think this is just chipping at the block. They're just throwing away the rule book regarding democracy on, the restriction on communications and internet and all the rest of it. And I just can't believe we're in the 21st century invading countries that's never threatened us and that's never been at war with us, and we all know it's down to oil. But let me just say this, George, I've got some great information from a couple of people that I picked up in the cab, and they're actually scientists from Cuba. You know, they've developed a vaccine for lung cancer in Cuba. They're now having dialogue with SmithKline Beecham. I don't know how far they're going to get with that because they have what they call the Helms-Burton Act, the American trade embargo on this poor little island called Cuba for the last 50 years. So this is a horror story that I just can't believe that what's going on and what we're told in the press and your program is a breath of fresh air.
Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate that. And a salute to the Cuban biomedical industry, which has not just developed that potential for a vaccine on lung cancer, but, as you know, on hepatitis and many other things, is leagues ahead of the health service in the so-called developed world. Life expectancy in Cuba is longer than it is in the United States of America. Infant mortality is lower in Cuba than it is in the United States of America. Anybody who wants to know about Cuba's health service should watch Michael Moore's film Sicko, which is a truly extraordinary movie. Thanks for that, Tony. As always, here's George in Glasgow. Go ahead, George.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
I would just like to bring to your attention about how all these politicians and journalists and all that are all sucking up to all these Libyans. You're forgetting what they've done to us. They blew us out of the sky. They've killed police and terrorised people in London. They're all needing to shoot their lot. They should all shoot themselves. All kill each other.
Well, the whole of Libya should should all shoot themselves.
Aye. They should all rot in hell, every last one of them.
My goodness, you're a bitter man.
No, I'm an honest man. You see that Al McGrachy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know one day I was for here to that? Yes, he walked right by me every
What were
day when I was in the
What
car.
were you in prison for, George?
Theft.
You're
Stealing off the Libyans.
You're a thief.
I was stealing off Libyans.
You were stealing off Libyans. Tell us more.
Aye.
Tell us more.
Stealing off Libyans, you know.
Tell
I
us
was
more.
surrounded with them. I was stealing off them, robbing them, stealing them every day.
Yeah. So you're a thief of some standing, yeah?
A right wing thief.
You're a right-wing thief.
Aye.
Uh,
Steal off all the left-wingers.
You steal off all these left-wingers, and would you
Aye.
put garden forks through them as well?
No. Just people that blow them up, people at the sky, eh?
Well, you're a
Nasty
credit.
people.
You're a credit to the prison. Was
Thank
that
you.
was that Greenock prison?
No, Berlin, eh?
Oh, in Berlin. He was in Berlin. So, how long were you in Berlin?
Oh, about 4 years.
You must have been some thief. Have you done 4 years?
I wasn't in at that time for season.
Well, what were you in at that time for?
No matter, we're talking about Libyans.
No, it will matter. I think if you're phoning up, I'm entitled to ask. You were doing 4 years. What was that for? You didn't murder somebody, did you?
No, I'm not a murderer.
But
I wish I was that day.
You're a thief, we've established, and you were in for 4 years. You were in for 4 years for something else.
Yes.
Was that violence?
No, I'm not a violent man.
Well, what were you in for 4 years for then?
Oh, just doing things I shouldn't be doing, eh? Taking other people's property and things like that.
No, but you said you weren't in for
Nothing
thieving.
nasty.
That 4 years you weren't in for thieving.
An amounts to thieving, eh? It's fraud, but...
Fraud. So you're a fraud and you're a
that's
fraud and you're a
noble
thief.
That's a noble act of dishonesty, you know, you get a wee bit of credit for that.
Well, we've
If you steal
established
after people-
that you're a fraud and that you're a thief, but you somehow think that your call that the Libyan people should all shoot themselves makes you sound big or clever. It actually just makes you sound like a knuckle-dragging ignoramus, a thief, a fraud, and a knuckle-dragging ignoramus. I wonder what else we could have found out about you. Maybe we will. Maybe somebody will recognize your ravings. Now, Fraser in Bolton, he's up after this. Community service is being made tougher. Plans are being drawn up that'll see unemployed criminals forced to work full 5-day weeks, including a day spent looking for a job. Ministers say it's a coincidence that the proposals are being revealed so soon after the riots and looting in England. These people in Birmingham are mainly in support of the idea.
All these looters have got to be made to pay back, and it's no good fining them.
Well, it makes sense. It gets them into a discipline, doesn't it, yeah?
Basically, it's a good idea, but I don't think it's going to work. I wouldn't think that they really care about the community anyway.
Now, Andrew says rebel for the fighters in Libya. That's another good suggestion. Rick from Annesley says, George, I agree, Facebook makes you more social. I've had 2 great get-togethers at my home with colleagues of old. 40 or more old mates getting a chance to meet old mates. We had a great barbecue, live DJs, lights, fog. Otherwise, I'd be at home just wasting the night away. And Mohammed in Huddersfield says, is NATO bombing residential areas in Libya? And will the rebels get rid of all the civil servants? George, tune to play out, Highway to Hell, AC/DC, says Mark in Macclesfield, I think. Or it may just be Mark Mack, rather. Kaz from Manchester says, Dear Gigi, we are heading for an economic meltdown, a fact, and the government cuts are not the answer, nor are they working. It's leading to problems, poverty and crime. Logical thinking, when I cut back on my spending, it will hurt the local shops in my area. It will also hurt the high street shops in my centre. Maybe they want an economic meltdown so they could create a new economic order. And James in Bognor says, people are blind to the fact that war fuels the Wall Street Bank, steers the current system is dead. Tell your listeners to buy silver to protect themselves from the collapse of the financial system. Let me tell you, I'm not qualified to give that sort of advice, so I don't endorse or otherwise the proposal that you should all buy silver. Now, let's talk to Fraser in Bolton. He's always worth hearing. Go on, Fraser.
Good evening, George.
Good
How
evening.
are you, my friend?
Yes, very well, sir.
That
That was an embarrassment, that Glasgow caller a few minutes ago, wasn't it?
I did just
Cringe.
cringe-worthy,
Yeah.
absolutely. But it wasn't a Glasgow accent, but that's beside the point. I thought it was more East Coast. Anyway, before I get started...
No, we're not taking the blame for him. He said he was from Glasgow, but go on. Maybe he's just always in the prisons in Glasgow.
Well, I've got a very serious point before I get started. In Fergusley Park this Sunday, if St Mirren beat Celtic, does that constitute a shock?
Who beat Celtic?
No, this Sunday, if St Mirren beat Celtic.
Oh, yes,
is that
yes.
a shock?
Well, I'm a Shamrock Rovers fan now myself.
Oh, I saw that, and I think that's wonderful. Oh God, you get me derailed completely about that. The Champions League money going to the League of Ireland is just brilliant. That's another story.
Marvellous, yeah.
Anyway, why I'm getting on is that I've one quick point: £31 million a week is getting used to bomb Libya.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to stop soon.
Yes.
I hope this winter, when it probably goes back to the last 3 winters, where it's -20 for weeks on end, that all the pensioners are going to be able to benefit from
Yeah,
government
very
having
good point.
a spare £31 million a week. But my bigger point was, I run a company, and since 2008, it's been brutal. It's been absolutely brutal. 80% of what we do is state supplies. And I've had to pay off people who are friends of mine. I've looked after them as best as I can. I'm doing 2-3 people's jobs myself. I wish I could take 5 holidays a year, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And I'm in the state supplies, and this is a big myth. See this cost-cutting to the state. The state doesn't buy from the state. The state buys from private companies.
Yeah.
And I've been on to this before about a year ago, George, and it's happening now. Double dip, you better believe it, because these cutbacks are leathering people. And I know people who are right-wing Tory voters, and they're on their knees because of what their people are doing. And it's just absolutely preposterous. It's like the blind leading the blind.
Indeed, off the cliff. Fraser in Bolton, thanks for that, my friend. Here's John in Gillingham in Kent. Go ahead, John.
Hello there, George.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that a song I would think would be applicable to this situation would be Money by Pink Floyd, because I think at the end of the day, and I won't say the word, but do you know what the word BS stands for?
Yes.
Behind all the BS, I think that this country and America has got their hands on a Libyan oil. I think there's a concerted effort to colonise and take over the Middle East.
And we've got idiots like Hussein in Birmingham. They're volunteering to be colonised.
Well,
Please rule us. We're too ignorant to rule ourselves.
Yeah, but that's their problem. That's why your program's a breath of fresh air against all the right-wing media rubbish that we hear sometimes. Sorry to say this on TalkSport and in the press. I mean, we don't seem very keen to be messing around with North Korea.
No, I don't think we'll fight them or China.
We don't seem very keen to be messing around with China, and I don't want to sound politically incorrect. We don't seem to be too keen to be messing around with Mugabe, but then again, maybe all the diamonds have been pillaged under the imperialists many moons ago. And I think Mugabe is innocent.
Well, I have always said that Libya was innocent of the Lockerbie bombing. They're guilty of many other things, but not that.
And I think
we'll soon find out, of course.
Yep. And I'm sorry, George. I think he's innocent, and I think that he's been made a scapegoat. And I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And I think that's why his release was. I think personally a deal was struck. I think they said if you accept that you're guilty, although you could spill the beans on far more things, then we'll let you go.
Well, definitely he was freed just before his appeal was to be heard, and the appeal would have been, I think, extremely embarrassing for the judicial authorities in Scotland. But we'll soon find out. We maybe were right, we maybe were wrong. We'll soon find out. Now, Steve Jobs, the man who built a corporation which some days, at least, is the most valuable corporation in the world, is standing down after a long series, really, of health problems. He is arguably the most important and innovative technological figure of the century, in the sense that he has built a corporation which, through iPads and iPhones and iTunes and Apple of all descriptions, has proved a very fruitful orchard. Leander Canny is the editor and publisher of the Cult of Mac website. I think that probably means he's a Mac fan. Let's hear Leander. Hello, Leander.
Hey, yeah, I'm here. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Very, very nice to talk to you, my friend. Tell us, if you would, sum up the importance of Steve Jobs to Apple and the importance of Apple to the world?
Well, the importance of Steve Jobs to Apple, he is Apple incarnate. He co-founded the company, of course, in the late 70s when he was a hippie kid with his friend Wozniak. Shaped it in the early days, but then got fired because he was kind of uncontrollable. And then came back to save it when it was just about to go out of business.
That was in what? That was in 96, was it?
Yeah, he came back in, I think it was 96 or 97. I forget the year.
It's not that long ago. It's not that long ago that the company might well have collapsed.
Yeah, right. It was 6 months from bankruptcy, and they barely had enough cash to struggle on. So he didn't want to come back. He was afraid that it was going to go out of business before he had a chance to turn it around, and he didn't want to be the guy in charge when it went under.
Yeah. And what did turn it around, Leander?
Well, he cut it. He slashed it to the bone. He slashed it to the bone. I mean, he just took it right back to the basics, and they rushed out the iMac. You remember the fruity iMac?
Yes.
And that was a smash hit, so that gave him enough breathing room to keep going. And then, of course, in 2001, right after 9/11, they came out with the iPod, and that was the product that really changed everything for the company.
The iPod, the music.
Yeah, the music player, because it was cheap and it introduced a lot of people for Christmas.
Yeah.
And they would never touch a Mac computer. They weren't interested in Macintoshes. They weren't interested in Apple. They were at the time they were more expensive than Windows PCs, and of course they didn't run Windows software and they didn't run games. But a lot of people got an iPod for Christmas, and they fell in love with it. And by this time Apple was opening up stores, so they go in the store and they check out all the other gear. And they go, this stuff's pretty good. And that would allow them to crawl out of that sort of niche of just selling.
And is it pretty good, Leander? I mean, I'm not the person to judge that. You probably are more likely to be able to do it than me. Are they pretty good? I mean, are they demonstrably better than the competitors in their field, by and large?
Oh, yeah. They're streets ahead. You said in your introduction that Jobs was probably the most important figure in technology this century. That's probably debatable. Maybe Edison, maybe some other inventors, could lay claim to that.
I meant this century, the 21st.
Okay, 21st, yeah. Well, but he's had look at his career. It goes back to the late 70s. When he came onto the scene, IBM was selling. The only computers you could buy were if you were a big corporation or a government agency. And PCs, if you wanted a PC, you had to get a kit and you had to solder it yourself from a wiring diagram. And it was Jobs who was the first person to say, these could be awesome consumer products. These should be sold to ordinary people. And he did that because he was kind of a techno hippie. He wanted to upset, structure of government and big corporations by empowering individuals with technology. So he had this he came out of the 60s California, the 1969 revolutionary sort of spirit.
Has he retained that spirit, Leander? Is he still a progressive person?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to look at the biggest company in the world now with a multi-billionaire. He's one of the richest people in America. He doesn't give his money away. He doesn't have any record, unlike Bill Gates, who's trying to give his money away. Jobs doesn't have any record of any philanthropy or, he hasn't even built a library or a hospital in his name. But
well, there's time yet. Leander, thanks for helping us with that. We're talking about Steve Jobs, of course, standing down from the position of head honcho at Apple, the most valuable corporation in the world. Some days. President Obama says America should take Hurricane Irene seriously, saying it's likely to be an extremely dangerous and costly storm. As it nears the U.S. East Coast, he's told people to obey evacuation orders. 55 million people are potentially in Hurricane Irene's path, including New York. Barack Obama said all indications point to Irene being an historic hurricane.
I cannot stress this highly enough. if you are in the projected path of this hurricane, you have to take precautions now. Don't wait. Don't delay. We all hope for the best, but we have to be prepared for the worst.
Well, his standards of oratory are slipping a bit. Don't wait, don't delay is a tautological, meaning the same thing, repeated. And that old cliché of hoping for the best and preparing for the worst, well, it's all very last century, that. I'm beginning to worry about the drop in the performance levels of the President of the United States. Nigel, who describes himself as the last Thatcherite in Kilmarnock. How about always look on the bright side of life to finish with? What a bunch of miserable, doom-laden wassocks you have as listeners. Ooh, the world's a nasty place. Well, quelle surprise. 'Twas ever thus and will always be thus, and there ain't nothing we, or failed politicians like you, can do about it. Well, Nigel, thanks for listening every week, and spending your own money every week to send in your insults. Thanks for that. Dev from Hull says, hello, George. Maybe the UFOs are emerging from the vicinity of the right-wingers planet called Uranus. I've been listening but haven't written in for a while. Hope the good listeners give a thought to all the victims of war. Keep on keeping on. Thanks, Dev. Long time no hear. Gilly in Hampstead sends no less than 3 kisses. Oh, Top Cap, when will we ever learn? When will we ever learn? Sung by Joan Baez in the late 60s. Appropriate at these uncertain times. Keep telling the truth, TC. Thanks, Gilly. Was that not the old Marlene Dietrich song, Where Did All the Flowers Go? Big Geordie says, evening, George. No chance of Deputy PM Clegg getting involved in the Libyan conflict. He's far too busy trying to remove blue paint from his jacket. Song to play the show out with? Well, how about 80s controversial band Frankie Goes to Hollywood with 2 tribes? Yes, not a bad suggestion. Crystal in Catherine says, good evening, Gigi. Good cheer and 2 kisses to you and to all the beautiful Libyan families. Hundreds of bombs they have indeed suffered, bombs falling daily. For one man? It's nonsense. Save the recession, ban the bombs. Seasons in the Sun is a favourite song. Crystal and Catherine. A very, very nice suggestion and a very nice text. Thanks for that. And Eddie in Islington says, George, I agree with your assessment on the BBC News, mainly just a spokesperson for the establishment and the government. I'm watching nearly all news programmes. A personal view on the Libyan crisis, although coming from a different angle. Russia Today News was excellent. Great show, George. Thanks, Eddie, for that. And Pat in Glasgow says, George, in your infinite wisdom, could you please explain why the British government and media insists on labelling the anti-government protesters in Libya as rebels, whilst the anti-government fighters in Iraq and Afghanistan are branded terrorists and insurgents? In fact, during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, Thatcher and her cronies classed these very same terrorists as the Afghan rebels. All very strange and very confusing. Very well put. Pat in Glasgow. Of course, Orwell foresaw that kind of doublespeak in the great work 1984. Here's Christina in the Algarve in Portugal. Christina, welcome.
Oh, good evening, George.
Very nice to hear from you.
Listen, I just want to tell you quickly about my bedtime reading I've managed to get hold of. Thierry Mason, 9/11, The Big Lie.
I'm not a big fan of Thierry Mason, I must say.
Okay, well, what I'm concerned about is Ali al-Megrahi, because I'm not absolutely convinced that he was guilty as charged.
Well, I'm absolutely convinced he was not, but we'll soon know.
Because I was watching a documentary on another channel quite recently, and it was done with the cooperation of some retired Scottish police officers.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing the chap in the draper's shop in Malta.
Yes.
Where some of these pieces of clothing were allegedly bought.
Yes.
And they were nothing like the right size for him. And when they went back, an awful lot of the statements were changed, and and then various pieces.
And quite a lot of money had changed hands.
And an awful lot of the forensic evidence either went missing or was changed. So I think it will be an absolute travesty if they use this attacking Libya to take him back to Scotland.
Well, they won't take him to Scotland, but they might extradite him, to the United States. That's a possibility, no doubt. Christina, thanks for that. In the Algarve, from one beautiful seaside resort to another. Here's Damien in Brighton. Damien, welcome back, sir.
Good morning, George.
Good morning.
I hope you'll give me a moment to explain myself on my comments about the economy, George.
Go on, yeah.
It gives me no pleasure whatsoever to predict that our economy is bound to return into recession, and it's bound to do that because of the Chancellor's incorrect analysis that the public sector is the problem and the private sector is the solution. Now, the problem isn't the state, George. I would say it's the complete opposite is true. I think that the problem is that the failing private sector keeps dumping its problems at the door of the state. And if I could give just a couple of examples of that. We've got 2.5 million unemployed people in this country. So that means that the private sector has failed to provide jobs for those people. It's not as if those people don't want jobs, because in the last quarter, 83,000 people had to take part-time work because full-time work was unavailable, which interestingly is the largest number of people who have had to take part-time work since 1992 when the Tories were last in power. Now that means that there's 2.5 million unemployed people who have to receive state benefits because of a private sector failing to employ them. The cost of rents in this country have doubled in the last 10 years. Because private landlords set their rents too high. That's adding billions of pounds to the housing benefit bill. You name it. We've got employment. We've got low wage employers having their wages topped up by the state. We've got private landlords being subsidised by income benefits. We've got private rail companies being subsidised by the state and banks subsidised by the state. And my point really is that I don't think, and it's an interesting challenge to throw down to right-wingers, can't think of a single private industry which doesn't receive state funding. Now, my main thrust of my argument is this, George, is that the truth that the Conservatives daren't admit is that privatisation isn't working, and yet they're pinning all hopes of growth in our economy on the further privatisation of the public sector, and they might as well be throwing sticks at the moon, George.
Well, I thought that was brilliantly summarised. Absolutely brilliant and succinct. Now, I've got tomorrow morning's front pages. Let me read, though, a couple of texts first. Tony the Scouser says, George, maybe the blue paint fumes might wake up Nick Clegg. What is this blue paint? Did somebody hit him with blue paint? I didn't know about that. And remember, he's a Liberal. Song to finish out, In the Fields, by Gary Moore and Phil Lynott. Tony the Scouser. Thanks, Tony. John in Oxford says, is there anything you don't know? How can you turn off the internet? The term you need is restrict access. Ah, yes, that's John the pedant in Oxford. Kevin in Bargoed says, George, great show. I've watched the news tonight, and I've seen no mention of NATO jets flying over Syria. The hypocrisy of the West is sickening. And Willie Bonner in Glasgow says, hail, hail. George, my wife left and took the satellite dish. So the song that sums up my week must be No Woman, No Sky. Very good. Very good, Willie. The old ones are the best, but I did like it. Mike, the London cabbie, says, as a follow-up to my text about the recession, George, and with the memory of the riots fresh in my mind, and the whole world generally being in a state of depression, I can only suggest that the song to finish tonight's show is the Beatles' Help. Indeed. Very, very good. Here's Heather in Halifax after this. An estimated 26 million people in the UK will be clinically obese by the year 2030. My goodness. A study by the medical journal The Lancet predicts treating people who are excessively overweight will cost the health service £2 billion a year. The research blames rich food, too little exercise, and a lack of action by the government. Professor Clem Macpherson, who led the study, says a so-called fat tax on junk food is one answer.
The responsibility does lie somewhat with individuals, but it also lies with the environment in which we live. And we've now, since the 1970s, living in an environment which is much too conducive to getting fat. And that's the responsibility of outside organisations.
Here, 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 here. Now, Heather in Halifax, is always worth hearing. Heather, welcome.
The last caller, Damien, although it was short and sweet, he got right to the point.
He did.
Tonight.
He's always very, very succinct.
Yeah. A lot of people in this country are now suffering for these wars, George. And like Sylvia from Selby, who's constantly saying, picking on the unemployed and them on low wages, I don't know how much it's costing you for your bills, your gas, your electric, your phone.
Well, it's all going up.
Yeah, these people are living on £117 a fortnight, while the multimillionaire ministers probably pay that to get a taxi to get from A to B.
Yeah.
How on earth are they expected to live on 117, even if they get full housing benefit? Damien was right. They are not getting full housing benefit. The rogue landlords are now have come into being. It's gone back to the Dickens 1930s, and this is why council houses were first invented. There's no council houses. People are having to go into private housing, and they're having to pay 10 or 20, 50 pounds a month on top. It cannot be done. It's impossible, George, to work out. So the only thing that these people must be doing, they cannot be living in the law. They must be living against it. They either must be stealing or having somebody living with them that shouldn't be. And it needs to be sorted, George, because at the end of the day, there's going to be more homeless people otherwise.
Marvellous. Great call, Heather. Jane in Harrogate says, George, the new celebrity Big Brother has dawned upon us. Don't you wish you were in the BB house with Jedward? No, Jane, I don't. Had I wished to, I'd have been paid a lot of money for being so. Gary in Dudley says, great show tonight, George. The guy you had on the show talking about UFOs was really interesting. I hope you have him on the show again soon. I wish he'd been on for longer. The conversation ended at unexplained weather phenomenon, and some people may believe that to be the final word. Unfortunately, he had more to say. UFOs are very real. I've seen more than one, and will never forget what I saw. On the subjects of UFOs, do some research on the Elohim. You will find it very interesting. I think I'll probably do that, Gary. Thank you. George, what's the difference between the MPs and the rioters? MPs are so confident of getting away with it, they don't wear hoodies. They do their looting in Parliament and their burning in the Middle East, Arab countries, while the rioters do it in their own. That's from Abe in London, SE4. Very, very powerful point indeed. Now, I've got tomorrow morning's front pages. Let me just skim through them. The Daily Telegraph leads on the killing way back then of WPC Yvonne Fletcher. Their front page splashes revealed Yvonne Fletcher's killer. Junior diplomat was seen by key witness firing a gun, according to secret report. And there's a picture of the man that they say fired the fatal shots. And there's plenty more on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. They've got an advert for their review exclusive, Inside the Mind of Barbara Streisand. I think I'll probably check that out tomorrow. The Independent, front page splash, Vengeance in Tripoli. Rebels settle scores. The United Nations urges restraint as sub-Saharan Africans are targeted. That's by my old friend Kim Sengupta, who says the killings were pitiless. They had taken place at a makeshift hospital in a tent marked clearly with the symbols of the Islamic crescent. Some of the dead were on stretchers attached to intravenous drips. Some were on the back of an ambulance that had been shot at. A few were on the ground, seemingly attempting to crawl to safety when the bullets came. Around 30 men lay decomposing in the heat. Many of them had their hands tied behind their backs, either with plastic handcuffs or ropes. One had a scarf stuffed into his mouth. Almost all of the victims were black men. Their bodies had been dumped near the scene of two of the fierce battles between rebel and regime forces in Tripoli. Come and see, these are blacks, Africans, hired by Gaddafi, mercenaries, shouted Ahmed bin Sabri. Well, Barack Obama will have some explaining to do about the lynching of black men in liberated Libya, which is going to become one of the many scandals of this conflict. The Times has its front page, flawed green scheme costs households £120. And The Guardian has a good story, hospital sued over do not resuscitate rule. The husband of a woman who died in one of Britain's best-known hospitals is taking its management and the Health Secretary, Andrew Lansley, to court, alleging an illegal use of do-not-resuscitate orders. I think that's a very, very important development. The Daily Express, is that still coming out? They've got Speaker's wife Sally gets Big Brother boot. Gutted Sally was embarrassed to be the first evicted. And The Sun says the ex-Con Factor, an X-Factor singer who wows judges on tonight's show, served time in jail after being accused of armed robbery. That's accused of armed robbery, you'll note. Not convicted of armed robbery, which, in case the Daily Express doesn't know, is a different thing. An OAP in Leeds says RPM is obsessed with the USA. Many in the UK would pay his plane fare if he went to live there, and took Pickles, Osborne, Gove and May with him. And a texter with no name says, George, it's a pleasure for you to read my text out, and also the A-team at TalkSport for passing it over to you, as I know you folk have a lot going on during the busy show over in Governorland. And Gigi, you said there, don't get involved in another ground war in Libya for your troops. And just look at Iraq and Afghanistan, what happened there. Also, you told them that in the past, and they did not listen. So why would they listen to you now? Well, that's a very good point. But I did tell them, and I am telling them again. Brian in Glasgow says, George, my song to end the show, We're Not Going to Take It, by The Who. And another texter says, it's Gaddafi who'll have the last laugh, George, when he releases from the prisons the benefit-seeking scumbags who'll invade Britain. Now that's the real weapon of mass destruction. I feel soiled reading out that kind of stuff, you know. Gigi, I read this quote in the past and I'm curious, did you coin the phrase? They say that if you don't study history and learn from it, then you're doomed to repeat it. No, I didn't coin it, but I often have quoted it. I'm not being funny, George, but Cameron has more holidays than Judith Chalmers, says Roy from Didcot. Now, for the younger listener, Judith Chalmers was a very, very deeply tanned BBC travel correspondent. And Roy in Didcot, at least, is not being funny when he says that David Cameron has even more holidays than her. I mean, I really do. I mean, you call me mean. But I think when you've had, and it's not 4, it's 5. He's had 5 holidays. And as was pointed out from Belfast, the year's not out yet. It's only still August. And he's had 5 holidays. Meanwhile, we go to hell in a handcart. Paul of Chalfont St. Peter, who has been writing all night in support of the PM. I think you're being a little unfair on the PM, as you should know the PM, like any head of state, doesn't have a holiday like the rest of us. Note, Paul, David Cameron isn't the head of state. That's Her Majesty the Queen. They are always running the country, but may have the chance to go away. They will nevertheless still have all of the issues going on that they have to deal with. A PM's holiday isn't the same as we get. They're still on duty whilst on halls. Yes, Paul, you've done your duty. Best wishes from Asif, who says, I don't know if Gaddafi would have fallen without UK intervention, but what is undeniable is that there was no surgical precision about this conflict. The civilian deaths caused by both sides are horrific in nature and scale. Cameron should be mindful of today's pictures of rotting corpses in the streets and hospitals of Tripoli before he gloats any further. You were great on the BBC this morning. Fantastic show as ever. Thanks, Asif, as ever, for that. Now, Steve Berry's up all night. He's up next. Steve, what have you got for us?
George, why is everybody so fat?
Well,
have you noticed?
Weren't you stunned by that statistic?
A quarter of British people, and then and it's going to get worse.
By 2030, it's going to be nearly a half. It's going to be 40%.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've been doing a project, a film project, and I've been watching a lot of British movies from the late 50s and the early 60s. And one of the things that strikes, in fact, Roy Kinnear is in one of them, and throughout the film, everybody's amazed at how fat he is, and you think, crikey, he wasn't that fat at all.
No. I was looking at Chubby Checker the other day, with the same thought in mind.
Yeah, thinking
Chubby Checker's not actually all that chubby.
But, and the other thing I wanted to talk about, my daughter's just taken them and she's off to college, was the GCSEs. I wonder why so many people are so eager to insist that they're much easier and that the figures are being manipulated. I mean, isn't it just that young people are applying themselves more and taking it more seriously than they did perhaps in my day?
I think so, and I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. That's Steve. He's up all night. He's on after this. Let me read a couple of quick texts, if I may. GG, with regard to the riots, it's that bad with policing in this country. The Home Office, the first time ever, had to call in the Special Constabulary to boost the numbers. The big one is coming. Mark my words. Great show, says Richard in Wolverhampton. Did we not protect Benghazi as it was being attacked? What's the difference? All wrong. Africa still think we are empire builders. We still think we are more liked than what we are. Falkland's a big one. Don't agree with everything you say, but at least you have an opinion. And Abu in Sheffield says, regarding the economy, do you think a gold-backed currency is the way to go? No, we abandoned the gold standard in the Depression in 1931. And after it had been done, people said, we didn't know you could do that. This is for all those who wrote in, who had a point of view similar to mine, on the 5 holidays of the Right Honourable David Cameron.